passionate, driven, enthusiastic, euphoric. This is who we are as entrepreneurs. But how we leverage these incredible attributes to dream and build businesses that scale and grow is what this podcast is all about. Hello, I'm attorneypreneur Josh Brown, and welcome to Franchise Euphoria.
Hey everybody, it's Dee here. I'm stepping behind the mic this week to bring you a really amazing episode. We are just starting 2016, and I decided to take a look back at the stats from 2015. One episode stood out head and shoulders above the rest, so I'd like to share it with you again. Sit back, hit play, and enjoy a replay of Josh and Cliff Ennico as they dive deep on buying a franchise. Enjoy!
I am thrilled today to have Cliff Ennico. He is a franchise attorney as well, and I'm thrilled to talk to him about his experience in franchising. He's been a attorney for, I think, approaching 35 years, has written 15 books, helps a lot of different entrepreneurs, and helps people buy franchises. So hopefully this will be a welcome dose for everybody, a change for everybody to hear a different perspective. And I think we're going to have an interesting conversation. Hello, Cliff, and welcome to the show.
Josh, it's my pleasure, man.
Well, you wrote an interesting article not too long ago for a publication where you were talking about sort of what's going on in franchising, some changes in franchising with the labor relationships and a recent decision that came out. And I definitely want to focus on what's happening now in franchising. But before we get into any of that stuff, I'd like for you to give a brief background on yourself and sort of what you've noticed about franchising over the 35 years that you've been involved.
Absolutely, man. Well, first of all, you gave me a wonderful introduction. I have been practicing law for 35 years. There were no child labor laws back then. I was a prodigy like Mozart. I started at the age of 5. No, I'm only kidding about that, of course. But I've been practicing in the New York City metropolitan area. I'm admitted in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and practice really throughout the northeastern United States. And I've been really working that entire time with entrepreneurs and small businesses really of all kinds, including franchises. My best claim to fame, Josh, is something for 10 years, I was the co-host of a public television show called Money Hunt. It ran from 1994 to 2003, and it was the very first Shark Tank type reality TV show for entrepreneurs and people who run their own businesses.
Really?
It was kind of this, it was really a lot of fun. It was kind of the same format. Of course, it was PBS, so we couldn't get down and dirty with the guests like they do on Shark Tank. But we traveled around the country. We would find people with very unusual business plans, and we would, grill them, and then we would bring during this first half of the show, my co-host and I would basically grill them. He was a venture capitalist, I was a lawyer, so we left no stones unturned. But then during the second half of the show, we brought out a guest who was the quote unquote Money Hunt mentor, who was a leading figure in that entrepreneur's industry. So, for example, we had Jerry Yang, who was the founder of Yahoo, was on our show. We had Debbie Fields from Mrs. Fields Cookies, some leading venture capitalists, and basically these people would just rip the entrepreneurs' livers out on live television. It was just incredible.
Well, how did that come about? How does that show come about?
Oh, man, I could tell you, I could do a whole show just on that. But basically, this other gentleman and I, we did a lot of speaking together. We became very friendly. We did a lot of panels together throughout New England. And just one day, we got caught in a snowstorm in Massachusetts. One of these horrible things. We were stuck on the highway for like 6 hours before they opened the roads again. And, when you're sitting in a Jeep with somebody for 6 hours, you kind of run out of things to talk about. So we started talking about, what would an entrepreneur TV show look like? I mean, back then there was like nothing on the air. We're talking 1992, 93. There was nothing on the air like this. So we just said, how can we make this compelling? How can we make it? Why would somebody want to watch a show like that week after week after week? And we started working on it. And I mean, within a month, we started doing the show on public access, local, public access TV, along with all the crazy people. And about 3 months later, we got picked up by PBS and started running nationally. It was an incredible success story. I mean,
did it run once a week? Did it run once a week or?
Once a week, yeah, once a week we did it. We shot a bunch of shows at the same time. It was not live; it was pre-recorded. But that's my claim to fame, and there are a lot of people who still remember me from that day as being sort of the very first, Shark Tank type of TV show, and that, of course, has opened a lot of doors. I write a nationally syndicated newspaper column now for entrepreneurs, kind of like an Ann Landers. People will email me their crazy business and legal questions, and either I answer them or I find somebody who really knows what they're talking about to answer them. That kind of thing. So I've had a lot of fun, actually. I'm one of the few attorneys around who's had sort of a very interesting life outside of the law, which is kind of fascinating, actually.
Well, but it works both ways, right? I mean, it helps you in your practice as well, which is great.
It absolutely does. It absolutely does. And also, too, it's a good thing. I always tell young attorneys, I actually mentor quite a few young attorneys here in the New York metropolitan area. I say, you have to talk about things besides law. People find lawyers very intimidating and judgmental, and you have to find a way to humanize yourself. If you're really looking to build a successful practice, you have to be willing to talk to people at their level and let them know that you're not judging them. Something as simple on my website, if you go to my website at cliffennico.com, which is my law firm website, I have a bunch of them, you'll see at the very end it says, still have questions, ... Call me, I don't bite.
I saw that, yeah.
So it's so silly, and yet I can't tell you how many people who have called me have said, Cliff, when I saw that tagline on the end of your website, I knew you were the person I wanted to talk to. And I said, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm not going to judge you just because you have an issue that needs a lawyer. Heck, that's why I'm in business, is to help people who have those kinds of issues. I'm delighted that you have a legal problem. Thank you for calling me. Why are you apologizing about it? This is a good thing.
Absolutely. I mean, so
for me anyway.
Well, no, I think that's great. I mean, I've noticed that with my practice too. You just my websites, one of the things people comment on all the time is they go, man, I can just tell from your website you're different. You're different from your traditional, attorney. And I'm like, that's great. That's what I want to be. I want to be, I am me, just like you are you. And we don't want to be intimidating to clients. We want to welcome clients in. And we have a lot of not only legal, but business advice to help them with. So it obviously seems like it's been a catapult for your long career.
For a lot of things. It really has helped me. And of course, I do a lot of speaking and whatever. But I mean, obviously, this podcast is not about helping lawyers build their practices. I imagine you must have a few lawyers among your listeners, but I would assume that most of your listeners are people who are looking to either buy a franchise or to set up a franchise of their own if they have a retail or service concept that they think is franchisable. I mean, you had asked me before about what changes have I seen in the last 35 years in terms of franchising. And I'll tell you, I've seen a lot of changes, Josh. I mean, when I first started practicing in the early 1980s, franchising wasn't the huge thing that it is today. Generally speaking, if you were thinking about franchising your business, you didn't do it unless you were very well established. Typically, I mean, back then it was mostly restaurants, fast food concepts, that kind of thing. Generally speaking, the general rule of thumb was you had to have at least 10 to 15 units already up and running in different locations before you considered franchising your business. Obviously, now that has changed. Virtually all the franchise documents that I have looked at in the last year have been for early stage franchises that have fewer than 10 units on the ground. In some cases, my client is the very first franchisee that these people are talking to. So you don't have, I guess, that's one major development. You don't have the level of experience with franchises that you used to be. I mean, once upon a time, if you were buying a Burger King or a Kentucky Fried Chicken or something like that, you knew these people were competent. They knew the business. They had the model down pat. They tested it in a bunch of different locations, and there was a high degree of confidence going into this that even though they couldn't promise that you would be successful, of course, no franchise ever does that, you knew that there was a good, strong chance that you would be successful because you were dealing with the A team. That is less true now than it used to be. A lot of franchise management teams that I'm seeing now are not as experienced in the business as they used to be. And I think there's a greater risk, especially for people who buy early-stage franchises that are still playing with their model, and they really don't know if it's going to work everywhere in the U.S. You're taking a much bigger entrepreneurial risk than you would, of course, buying a Burger King or a Kentucky Fried Chicken. Of course, the early stage franchises have the one advantage that they're usually affordable. The initial franchise fee is only something like $15,000 or $20,000 as opposed to $200,000. So there is that. I call this the
Although you'd be surprised. I will say that and I'm sure you've seen those too, where you have a startup and they want a significant franchise fee.
Yep.
But they don't even have the system down.
Yeah, and I share your laughter on that, Josh. I think you would probably advise your client the same as I would. Be very careful. Like they say on Game of Thrones, there be demons. There are dragons over there. Be careful. You're taking a big risk here and putting a big chunk of your life savings and rolling the dice in Vegas. Don't get me wrong. I'm not knocking early stage franchises, Josh. But I do think they're for a very particular kind of person. An early stage franchise is for somebody who is a bit more of a gambler, someone who is willing to roll the dice in Vegas, roll up their sleeves, admit to themselves, look, these guys don't know any more about this business than I do, but I'm willing to take the risk because I see it as a huge opportunity, and I can build myself a huge territory, a huge fiefdom, and get filthy rich. I'll be one of the early adopters who make this franchise happen. You've got to be a little willing to not break the rule book, but bend it a little bit depending on local conditions. And you've got to be willing to say, okay, here's the deal. You only got 5 franchisees. Great. I want the whole state of whatever. I want the whole state of Connecticut. I want the whole of Southern New England. I want to be a regional franchisee, a master franchisee, an area developer, and I'm going to be your count, your baron. I want that fiefdom. I want to be your Southern New England baron, who's going to have this whole territory to myself someday, when you guys take off and you become successful. You have to have more of that kind of mentality. If you're a downsized corporate executive who is looking at a franchise as a possible bridge to retirement, I think an early stage franchise is just a very bad fit for somebody like that. You really want the hand-holding. You want someone to spoon-feed you more. You want to know that you're buying safety, security, and support. And no early stage franchise, at least not any of the ones that I've encountered recently, can really offer you that.
Well, I think that's really interesting. I think that's great advice. I mean, one of the things that you see obviously with an early stage franchise is they don't have a brand to speak of, which is a cornerstone, right, of franchising, or at least established franchising. And so then, it's a matter of, well, what are you actually buying? What kind of system do they have in place now, and how much is that going to change? And are you going to be willing to go along for the ride? And so, yeah, I completely agree with everything that you've said. And it does seem to me, and I don't have the point of reference that you have going back, 35 years, but I do come across, just like you do, a lot of new franchise systems. And you had mentioned early on that you very rarely saw systems that didn't have at least 10 to 15 units. I'm curious, and I know you work mostly with franchisees, but one of the things that I talk about with businesses, and businesses will contact, I'm sure they ask you as well, geez, they're having some success, and now they want to look at franchising. I'm quite opposed to franchising if you are a brick and mortar type business, if you don't have at least 2 or 3 locations going at the same time to where you can prove out that system. Do you agree with that?
I would totally agree. And I think I would expand it and say that you really shouldn't even consider franchising unless you have 5 to 10 units or locations in operation. You need to know that your franchise will work in different demographic areas, different economic areas, different parts of the country. A recurring pattern, and I see this a lot because I'm in the Northeast, Josh. I mean, this is one of the most expensive parts of the country to live in. I see a lot of franchises that start in places like Oklahoma and Colorado and Minnesota, where things are relatively cheap, and they build a following, they develop locally, and then the franchise moves out to the 2 coasts, to the Northeast and to the West Coast, and the whole model breaks down because the cost structure is just so different here. In Oklahoma, you can buy a starter home for less than $100,000. In Southern Connecticut, you need at least $500,000 to buy a starter home. It's a different mentality. Things cost a lot more here. And as a result, a lot of basic retail and service concepts break down here. Plumbers here charge a lot more than plumbers in Oklahoma because they have to stay alive. And I see a lot of franchise models break down because of that, because they can only work in an area where, so for example, a lot of I will tell you, and also too, behavior patterns, the muffler franchises tend not to do very well here in the Northeast because up here, we buy our cars from dealers, and when we go to have them fixed, we tend to go back to the dealer. We don't go to a specialty muffler shop or a special transmission shop. Whereas down in the South, for example, people spread that work a lot more around to different types of auto repair shops. And that's just a behavioral thing, a cultural thing, if you wish. Different parts of the country behave differently, and it may well be that a franchise will only work in a certain part of the country. This is something you don't know when you only have 5 or 6 units. You need to have a lot more because you begin to realize, hey, this cookbook will work anywhere in the U.S. We'd be crazy not to franchise.
So, for a potential franchisee, for a potential buyer who's coming in and looking at a newer type system, what are some of the concerns that you raise to them that they might not otherwise know?
Okay. Well, first of all, I tell them really, really study the management team, carefully. If these people, if they're honest, they will admit that they know very little, not much more about this than you do. And don't get me wrong, some people who are running early stage franchises, they're very open. They disclose properly, and I respect that, of course, as an attorney. But I say, look at the management team very carefully. You want to know that there are people who understand the business. You also want to know that they have people who know how to sell franchises, too. Now, that may sound a little strange. What you don't want is a management team that only knows how to sell franchises, because obviously they can't teach you the business. They can't warn you about the pitfalls and help coach you through those things. But a franchise that doesn't have people on their team who know franchising isn't going to grow and become successful. Beware the franchise that only has one member on their management team, and it's the person who ran a very successful outlet in Tulsa, Oklahoma for 10 years, and now he's starting to franchise. Now, he may know his market extremely well, and he may also know the business very well, but he's never had to grow a big company before. He doesn't really know how franchises work and how to sell franchises. You want both. And if it's a brick and mortar franchise, I always tell my franchisee clients, you want to meet and spend at least a day talking to their VP of real estate. You want to know that they have somebody who understands how real estate works. Seriously, I had a client who was looking to buy a fast food franchise. It was kind of a new concept, gourmet, healthy eats, that kind of thing. There's a lot of those floating around. And I have to say, the founders had a lot of restaurant experience. One of them had worked for a very successful fast food franchise. But the VP of real estate was somebody's daughter. She was 23 years old, and this was her first job outside of college. Now, if you have ever had to negotiate with a shopping center landlord before, forgive me, these people have tattoos and fangs, and their attorneys are even worse. Any 23-year-old, I don't care how smart or how tough they are, is going to get eaten alive by those people in negotiations. Forgive me, you know what I'm talking about here.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I want to see somebody who looks just about as brutal as what they're going to be up against. And I want somebody who knows the real world here. There are a lot of people who can do demographic studies and say, generally you want to be in this part of town, but when it comes down to really rolling up your sleeves and fighting with a family landlord who's third generation in the business, whatever, it takes a much different personality, and you want to make sure that you've got somebody there who can negotiate effectively for you should it come to that. So those are the things I tell you. In an early stage franchise, you have to understand the concept, but you're really buying the people. understand the people. And if you really do believe in the people, then maybe it's an investment that you should take seriously.
Well, no, I mean, I think that's great advice. And by the way, I apologize for my coughing. I've been battling a cold that just won't go away. So I apologize to everybody for
you
that.
Poor guy. I know what it is. And at my age, though, you whenever that happens, you start worrying. So you're at the stage where you're not worried about it. I'm at the stage where I start coughing. I start thinking, tuberculosis, emphysema, that kind of stuff.
No, I'm not worried about that. I just want to. It's just frustrating. So, but I apologize for that.
No, don't do apologize. I'll tell you something. My dad told me something that was very profound when I was a boy. I remember we were driving someplace, and he asked me. Somebody on the radio mentioned about the problems of middle-aged people. So I asked my dad. I'm just going to take curiosity, Dad. I hear that term a lot. Middle-aged. People referring to somebody as being middle-aged. When are you middle-aged? What's the cutoff point? And he kind of laughed at me. He goes, "Well, it really has nothing to do with any specific age, Cliff. Here's how I would explain it. There's going to come a time in your life where you stop thinking about how old you are, and you start thinking about how many years do I have left. And when you have reached that point in life, you are middle-aged." So I think for different people, it happens at different times in their life. But that's the best definition of middle age that I've ever heard.
No, that's great. Well, I mean, tell me this in the few minutes we have left, because it's been great talking with you, and I know we don't have that much time, but I'd like to. There's a lot of people who I'm sure approach you, and I know approach me, who really aren't sure whether or not they want to buy a franchise. They have thoughts of maybe doing it themselves, or looking at a franchise. Where do you start with somebody like that? Because a lot of listeners on this show are really in that space, and I get emails about that all the time. And I certainly have my thoughts on that, but I'm curious where you start with somebody who comes to you and says, I'm not sure about franchising.
Well, the answer is there's no one pat answer to that question. I always tell people, I begin by telling them, look, when you're buying a franchise, buying a franchise is halfway between working for yourself and working for somebody else. It's smack dab in the middle. You do have your own territory. They can't put another place too close to you. You are responsible for profit and loss. You have a certain amount of leeway to make decisions, but you really aren't your own boss at the end of the day. Your job is to execute their cookbook and their business plan. A franchise is not looking for creative decision makers. They're looking for creative order followers.
Yep.
To use a military analogy, they're not looking for buck privates. They're not looking for people who need to be told how to tie their shoelaces, but they're not looking for generals either. They're looking for good second lieutenants. They're looking for people who, when they say, okay, here's your territory, make the most out of it. There's Hill 47 over there. Take that hill with the minimum number of casualties. The response is a crisp yes, sir. Now, you still have an ability to make some decisions about how you're going to attack Hill 47, but you can't go and attack Hill 48 because you think it's a better hill. Do you see what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
You're looking for. So I always tell people that you need to have an entrepreneurial sense, but you can't be too entrepreneurial. If you're the kind of person who's going to chafe at restrictions and regulations, not so much now, but after a couple of years, after you've been in the franchise a while, you're comfortable with the business model, you're not calling the 24/7 hotline with crises every 5 minutes. Sooner or later, you're going to start wondering, why am I paying 10 to 15% of my sales to a company that's no longer doing anything for me? And that's going to chafe a little bit. You got to make sure that you can get past that point. I call it sophomore slump. A franchisee who has bought a franchise, he was nervous as hell for the first year or two, but now he's gotten to the point where he's comfortable and he's starting to ask all kinds of questions. He's starting to wonder, can I make this better? And the franchisor is giving him resistance because, he wants to deviate too much from the franchise model. You have to be willing to work comfortably in that kind of an environment. And frankly, not everybody can. Now, that's why I said before, if you're buying an early stage franchise, you can be a little bit more entrepreneurial. But if you're buying an established franchise, you're kind of expected to wear a straitjacket to some extent, and you have to ask yourself how comfortable you feel about it. It's very much a Goldilocks kind of analysis, and no two clients are exactly the same, Josh. I mean, when I look at a situation, I look at the franchisee, I look at the franchise that he's looking to buy, and I try to make the best assessment that I can of, is this a good match of what the person wants to accomplish and what the franchise looks to accomplish. And if I don't get comfortable with that, I will tell the client, look, this is a great franchise, but I'm not really sure it's for you for X, Y, and Z reasons. This is why I tell people, if you're buying a franchise for the first time, go through a franchise broker. Go through, there's a bunch of them. There's an organization called Franchise Network, FranNet. There's another one called the Entrepreneur Source, which is actually based here in Connecticut. There's another one called Fran Choice. There's a bunch of them. You probably work with some of the others too, because that's what these people do. And unlike an attorney, they're not charging you $300 an hour to do this. They look at you, they look at your interests, what you're good at, and they try to match you with a franchise where you have the maximum chance of succeeding. Take advantage of that. It doesn't cost you anything, and it'll make your life a lot easier. It at least will help you narrow down, okay, I hate I'm the kind of guy who hates getting my hands dirty, so any kind of automotive franchise I should probably rule out.
No, I think that's a great point. I mean, I think that consultants traditionally, I mean, there are few, but I definitely know some who are independent franchise consultants who you do pay money to. But the franchise consultants through FranNet and Fran Choice, like you speak of, I think they do some really good things for buyers. First of all, they do great qualifications. I think they do great qualifications and give people very realistic ideas of what they can afford. And it does help them narrow it down. I always tell people, once they get it narrowed down, then seek out the professional advice. Because there is an objective component that you get more with an attorney, quite frankly, than you do with a consultant, because the consultants, they get paid from the franchisor, so they don't have that objective, that truly objective nature about them. But I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I know many, and I work with many franchise consultants, and they can do a lot of good and help people, because there's a lot of people out there, and I'm sure you've seen this too, Cliff, that their idea of due diligence is hopping online for 3 hours and doing an internet search. And, you can just get so lost in your search doing that. There's a lot of bad information out there, and so you need to go seek professional guidance, especially if it's your first time doing it.
Oh, absolutely. Well, first of all, you have to do some soul searching, I think. You have to ask yourself, what kind of a person am I? What sort of thing do I want to be doing? I mean, let's face it, to succeed in any business, Josh, franchised or otherwise, you got to be a little bit of a workaholic. You got to be willing to put 70, 80 plus hours into this every week. And you're not going to do it if you don't think it's a valuable experience, if you're not enjoying it, if you don't feel that you're contributing to society in some positive way. It's not going to happen. I mean, if you really don't if being around old people makes you uncomfortable, if you just don't like dealing with the problems of old age, and I'm not judging you if you are, but you should never ever buy a senior care franchise.
That's right.
That's silly, but it's a silly example. So it really is. If you hate getting your hands dirty, do not buy a muffler franchise. I mean, it's so basic, and that's what the franchise consultants can help you with. Because I'll tell you, the franchise world is changing a little bit. I don't know if you want to go into this, or maybe we can make it a separate podcast sometime. But there are some things in the franchise world that are changing right now.
Let's go into that for a couple minutes, if you have a couple minutes left, because I did want to talk about the here and now, and sort of, where we are in franchising now, and how things are. There are some changes that are coming about.
And let's talk about. There are two that I see specifically here. One is a business thing, and one's a legal thing. Let's take the legal thing first, since you and I are both lawyers. I think you're seeing this. In every franchise agreement I've ever seen, there's a clause that says that that you, Mr. Franchisee or Ms. Franchisee, are not an employee of the franchise. You cannot hold yourself out as an employee. You must hold yourself out as an independent contractor and an independent outlet of our franchise. You cannot say, you can call yourself McDonald's, but you can't say you work for McDonald's. You are an independent, wholly owned franchisee with your own territory. And of course, that's what people are looking for, the chance to build their own business and do whatever. Yet we all know that franchisors in general exert a lot of direction and control over their franchises. They really want all their franchise. I mean, at the end of the day, Josh, franchises are all about uniformity and consistency. They want everybody looking the same, following the same game plan, the same recipes, whatever. And at some point, that direction and control may be so overwhelming that you are really not distinguishable from an employee of the franchise. And we're starting to see now some lawsuits that are beginning to challenge this. There's a case out of Virginia where a franchise I can't remember, I think it was McDonald's, but it was one of the fast food franchises. A bunch of employees got together and basically accused the local franchisee of racial discrimination. Apparently, the local franchisor fired only his African-American employees. He said some very bad things that he should never have said. A pretty compelling case, I have to say, from what I read in the papers. But what these people did, they didn't just sue the local franchisee. They also sued McDonald's or the fast food franchise itself. They sued franchise corporate, basically claiming that they created the environment in which such discrimination could happen, and that the franchisee was really an employee of the corporate franchise headquarters. I believe it was McDonald's, but I'm not 100% sure. It was definitely one of the fast food franchises. And I think we'll see, the case hasn't come to the point yet where we can say if they're going to dismiss it out of hand, but it's generated a lot of press. I mean, 5 years ago, nobody would have ever thought to bring a case like that. But some people are starting to challenge the extent to which franchises control their local franchisees' activities. It'll be very interesting to see how that case comes out. The second big thing that I'm seeing, and this is more of a business thing, is a situation where and this is really a trend in more established franchises, where the franchise is allowing its franchisees to have more autonomy to make marketing decisions as to what products they will offer locally, how they will conduct their business, and that kind of thing. A couple of the very largest franchises, for example, are starting to step back, and they're telling their franchisees, look, we expect you to follow our back office plan. We want we will teach you how to run this business, and we expect that you will run this business our way so that, we have uniform sales reports and all this kind of stuff. But when it comes to what the customer sees, the customer experience, we will give you more leeway to change that to conform more closely to market conditions. So if you're a McDonald's franchisee and there is absolutely no market in your community for fried chicken, you do not have to offer the fried chicken. That kind of thing.
Are you seeing that? Are you seeing that also in the way in which they market? I mean, I'm seeing that from a business perspective where, although in franchising they're pretty slow to come around to this, but I think they're starting to get to a point where they're allowing more autonomy for the franchisees to market themselves different ways through the advent of social media and other sorts of things, where it's really kind of been lackluster. Are you seeing that as well?
Yeah, well, that's one of the hot areas. I mean, one of the questions I always ask a franchisee is, will the franchise allow you to have your own Facebook page, your own LinkedIn profile? Will they allow this? Because especially if you're targeting a younger demographic, this is where you're going to find people. They're not going to look for you in the yellow pages. And I have seen some early stage franchises that would still require you to have a yellow pages ad. I'm saying, my God, how 1950s is that? Yeah. You got to be allowed to do things on social media, and that means that the franchisor is not not going to have the same level of control over the franchisee that they used to have. You can't. I mean, every time you put a posting on your Facebook page, you don't want to have to get a franchisor's consent to that, because you're going to be doing it 10 times a day.
Well, isn't that I mean, that one word, control, is the link between both of your points. I mean, it's the link between the employer-employee and the joint liability that we're talking about on the legal side, and it's the link between, on the business side, the marketing ability for a franchisee. It's both control and trust, really.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, a question that a lot of, especially established franchises, are going to have to think about is, how uniform do we really need to be? Would people trust us more if there were more deviation between different locations and things like that? To what extent do we? Of course, you don't want a situation where there's so much deviation that each franchisee is really running its own store and they're actually competing with each other. People are going to the place next door in the next town because they offer a different menu mix. I mean, you want people to go to their local franchisee. So it's going to be a major, I think, challenge for franchises in the next few years, is how much individual freedom do we want these people to have while still maintaining the uniformity and consistency that helps us to build a national or a worldwide brand.
Yeah, I mean, I think they want, it's always a challenge because they want the consistency of the experience, but yet there's the very real realization that really, whether you're a franchise or your own small business, your location is huge. And local markets and local marketing has really become more important than it ever has been, both in an online and offline space. I mean, everything we see with what Google's doing with their search and every other online searches, it's all coming back to local. And so it's important to have that trusted, localized presence. But at the same time, it's important in franchising to create that consistency of experience. And sometimes those butt heads.
Yeah, they do, and it's always the tension within franchising, and historically, it's always been resolved in favor of the consistency and uniformity. If I'm driving in a strange town and I see the Golden Arches, I know exactly the kind of experience I'm going to have, down to the finest detail. If I see Joe's Hamburgers, I don't know what kind of an experience I'm going to have there. It may be great, it may not be. So that's always been the attraction of franchising. But I think people too, just like we no longer have 6 and 7 TV channels to watch. We now have thousands. There's a greater fragmentation now. People, I don't think, going forward, are going to have that same brand loyalty that they used to have in the past. They're going to start expecting something different. They're not going to trust, especially younger people, the millennials, are not going to so much trust a brand where everything looks the same. They're going to want to see local variations because that's the world they live in. I mean, show me a college campus with 1,000 kids, and I guarantee hardly only a handful of them watched the same TV show last night. Sure. At 10 o'clock. They were all over the place, looking at all kinds of different stuff, and they're going to want that same kind of an experience. So it'll be it's going to be an interesting time for franchising. I mean, it's not just that the franchises are changing, but people are changing too in their expectations. They want things that are healthier. They will not tolerate certain things of a franchise that they used to tolerate years ago. In fact, it didn't mind. People knew when they were buying a McDonald's hamburger, they weren't buying a gourmet hamburger. But maybe now that's changing. Maybe McDonald's needs to go more upscale, to keep its marketplace. It's a fascinating. I always tell people, and this is not just franchising. I think it's a good way to close. Whether you're buying a franchise or whether you're starting a business of your own, the key to being a successful entrepreneur is you have to be a good student of human nature. If you have a business background, if you know how to do a spreadsheet, if you know a lot about accounting, all of that is helpful, certainly, and these are essential skills you need. But the key to success is being a good student of human nature, understanding people, understanding what makes them tick, and understanding how those things change and evolve over time. Because that's how you pick up on entrepreneurial opportunities. A famous politician, I can't remember who it was, it might have been FDR, but one of the former presidents used to have a saying that being a leader is all about figuring out which way the crowd is going and then running out in front of them and start waving a sign. And that's a beautiful metaphor. I mean,
Sure.
being an entrepreneur is all about reading the marketplace, where's it going, and then getting out a little bit in front of that so people perceive that you are the place to go, that you're the one, that you're going in the same direction that they are. And that takes a little bit of, I don't really think it takes a psychology degree, Josh, but it certainly takes a little bit of common sense and just a lot of folk wisdom, perhaps, to be able to look at customers and say, you know what? They're going in this direction now. They're very stressed for time. I need to help them more manage that. So maybe what I should do if I have a barbershop type of an operation is I should put TV monitors in my waiting room so the kids can watch, cartoons on Saturday morning. I'll get more traffic on Saturday. While mom's getting her hair cut, the kids can watch cartoons. It's just that basic understanding of where people are going and how you can best accommodate them.
Well, I think that's a great point too. Just when you're looking at franchises too, is for individuals to not put their own thoughts about the business on the back burner. I mean, if you can tell a lot from a franchise, if you go into that franchise, if it's a brick and mortar, and you say to yourself, "Wow, it seems odd that they don't have a TV here. Or it seems odd that they don't do this." I mean, that tells you a lot about where they are and where they're going, which are things that a lot of people overlook, but things that, you can't get from reading a franchise disclosure document. You can't get from reading an agreement, but you can get from actually going out to the business and getting to know the business before you dive into it.
I always tell people you should spend at least a day living with a local franchisee and living life the way he or she does. See what happens. Just hang out there, get a cup of coffee, and just watch what happens. What are the interactions with the customers? Is the place crowded? Is it empty? Is it crowded at certain times of the day? Not others. Are the people just coming in, hanging out, doing stuff on their laptops and not eating anything because they're using the free Wi-Fi? These are the things you have to pick up on. What really goes on in these places? Are they with it? Are they adaptable? Are they moving with the times, or are they still asking you to take out a Yellow Pages ad in 2015? Those are the questions that you have to keep asking is yourself, because let's face it, once you buy the franchise, it's not just the upfront fee, it's the royalty that you're going to be paying, which can be as high as 10 to 15% of your gross monthly sales. You're paying this money to an organization. You want to know that this organization is working to help you grow and survive the next 10, 15, 20 years, however long you're planning to be in this business. You want to know that they're going to be there with you. And if you sense that this is just a sleepy organization where they're just going to hand you the cookbook and say, "Here, have fun, call me if you get sick," and that's not going to fly anymore. I mean, and one thing I will tell you that has not changed in 35 years, when you're buying a franchise, you don't have the same control over your life that a non-franchise person has, but you are still an entrepreneur. The franchisee who is always going to fail is the one who sits behind the cash register waiting for the franchise to do all the work. That person would not have been a success 35 years ago, and he or she will not be a success in 2015.
That's right.
The person who is going to be successful is the person who gets out from behind the cash register and gets out there, becomes a part of the community, really beats the bushes, and makes sure there is always traffic going to that franchise outlet, doing whatever is necessary, even being willing to beat up on the franchisor sometimes and saying, "Hey, you're not doing enough. My competition is killing me because we don't offer X. We got to offer X, or I'm out of here." You have to be willing to be a little bit confrontational that way, and be an entrepreneur and take ownership of the franchise as if it were your business. Now, that's still no guarantee you're going to succeed, but your odds improve dramatically once you take that attitude of ownership, toward the franchise.
Well, that's really great information, Cliff. You're a wealth of knowledge, and certainly love to talk to you again. Have you back on the show? I feel like we could talk about. We could talk for another hour if we wanted to. At least. So many things to talk about. But in wrapping things up, tell people where they can best get a hold of you, and any parting advice you'd like to give to the franchise buyers out there.
Okay. Well, I got a bunch of websites, Josh, but the one that I think is easiest to pronounce on the on a podcast is succeedinginyourbusiness.com. This is my weekly syndicated newspaper column. It's for entrepreneurs, for people buying franchises, small business owners of all kinds. I'm in about a couple of hundred newspapers around the country, but succeedinginyourbusiness.com, you can subscribe to the column via an RSS feed. It's absolutely free. I don't charge for this. It's kind of of interesting. I try to write about things that other people are not talking about in the small business community, and I always make sure at least once or twice a month there's always an article for people who are buying franchises.
Well, that's great. Well, it literally has been great to meet you, and I look forward to staying in touch with you. You're doing some really, really great stuff. You're giving some great advice to people, and I really appreciate you coming on and providing your perspective.
That's great. And if people have some time, they can go onto YouTube and type in Money Hunt television show or Money Hunt TV show, and you'll see we still have a couple of the old shows up on YouTube. You can see what I looked like, 25 years ago when I still had hair and I was a lot thinner. Well,
Cliff, that's what I'm going to do right when we hang up.
Exactly. It's a lot of fun, actually, and I still get calls from people who've actually seen that up on YouTube. Of course, the problem there is they expect me to still look the same, and that's getting a little hard. But it's still a lot of fun. It's good to know that you have been a footnote in the history of
no, it's
American
great. Are
small
you kidding
business.
me? No, that's great.
It really is. So anyway, check it out. It's a lot of fun.
We'll do. Well, you keep up the great work, and we will definitely be in touch.
Thank you, Josh, and the same to you.
Thanks.
Thanks for being with us today on the Franchise Euphoria podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to go to iTunes and provide a review. Also, please remember that although Josh Brown is a licensed and practicing attorney, nothing contained in this podcast should be construed as legal advice, because it is not. The information contained in this podcast is general and educational in nature, and none of it should be relied upon as legal advice. That being said, if you have questions for Josh and would like to contact him, please email him at josh@franchiseeuphoria.com. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope you tune in to our next weekly episode.